far in the highlands of Vale Moraine, where clouds drifted below the peaks and the air tasted faintly of salt and starlight, there stood a peculiar structure known simply as the Glassrise. It wasn't a tower in the traditional sense. From a distance, it appeared as a tangled loop of white metal ribs and curved lenses, as though a telescope had dreamt itself into a palace. There was no roof. The sky passed uninterrupted above it. Instead of walls, it had sweeping arcs of polished glass that caught the moonlight and turned it into soft halos on the floor. This was where the observers lived. Not astronomers in the ordinary sense, but listeners to light, to air pressure, to the tonal hum of planetary memory. They didn't look at the stars just to see them, but to hear their patterns, to understand the cadence of light. Long traveled among them lived just the youngest observer ever appointed, and certainly the most curious. Her role had once been ceremonial, assigned to balance the numbers, but Jesa had taken to the work with a quiet hunger. She spent long hours adjusting the rotating glass arms that bent starlight into a visible spiral. She could identify each planet by its temperature imprint on quartz. She once read the shimmer off a passing comet and described it as a Psy wearing a silver scarf, but tonight felt different. The air had thickened slightly, and the lenses in the southern wing had stopped rotating. The silence wasn't eerie, was expectant. Jesa climbed to the highest deck of the Glassrise and waited, and just after midnight, a column of faint violet light bloomed upward through the center of the floor, framing her body in stillness. A hidden lens, dormant for centuries, had turned of its own accord. Jesa stepped into the beam, and the stars as if acknowledging her. The beam vanished within seconds. As suddenly as it had come, the rest of the Glassrise remained calm, unshaken, though the air tingled at the edge of touch. Jesa stood perfectly still, her breath shallow, waiting for some sign that what she had seen was real. Nothing moved. No. Alarms sounded. But something had changed. She returned to her chamber, half-moon alcove lined with light records. Each disc of crystal there held a compressed thread of starlight observed on previous nights, not in sound, but as resonance. Jesa inserted a fresh disc into the central prism and began playback. Silence. Then a lotum dot. Not mechanical, not solar, it was deliberate. The tone wavered gently, then rose like wind caught in cloth. It wasn't a warning or an accident. It was a shape, an echo given form. She watched the frequency as it imprinted on the crystal. It danced in time. It formed what could only be described as a signature, "It's a reply," she murmured. "But from whom?" Vale Moraine had always listened to the stars, but the stars had never spoken back. Not until now. She played the tone again. This time, it harmonized with the room. The glass columns around her began to vibrate subtly. Not enough to crack or hum audibly, but Jesa felt it through the floor, a slow agreement, as if the building had known it was waiting for this all along. She spent the rest of the night calibrating new lenses to search the origin. But the source was not a star. It was not even outside. It was coming from below, not underground, but within the structure itself. Somewhere inside the Glassrise, a reply had been waiting for someone to understand. Jesa began to map the vibration trail. She moved from chamber to chamber, pressing her hand against the glass curves, listening for the subtle hum. As she descended into the mid-level galleries, she noticed that the light shifted unnaturally. They're too soft, too calm, like moonlight underwater. It was almost as if the entire structure had drawn in a slow breath and was now holding it in the eastern annex. She found it a section of the lens array that had long been sealed, considered unstable due to a flaw in the calibration, now pulsed with faint indigo glow. The walls near it had changed temperature, slightly warmer. She stepped forward, and the panel before her melted away, not literally, but visually. The light distorted for a moment, showing her a hidden corridor that had no place in the architectural plans. It was narrow, arched, and faintly iridescent, built from the same memory glass as the rest of the observatory, but older, with faint etchings along the edge like threads of wind. Frozen in form, at the far end of the passage stood an orb. It floated motionless, held in suspension by a cluster of twisting support frames. The orb was dark, opaque, but not lifeless. As Jesa approached, the tone from earlier began to rise again in her mind, not through her ears, but through her bones. The orb responded. A ripple ran across its surface. Then it projected a constellation not onto the wall, but into the air. Gasped. It wasn't a real constellation. It was her name, Jesa, written in the shapes of starlight, and with it an unfamiliar word softly folded into the air. Welcome, interpreter. Jesa didn't sleep that night. Torninets. She returned to the orb every evening, drawn not by curiosity anymore, but by the growing connection she could feel unfolding between her and whatever resided within the signal. The chamber no longer hid from the others. Slowly, word spread through the Glassrise, but no one intruded. It was understood this was her discovery, and more than that, her conversation. Each night, the orb changed slightly. It shifted color, became more translucent, showed maps of star fields that had never been recorded. It sent whispers of geometry into the air that made her heart slow, her breath deepen, but it never spoke in language. Only shape, only tone. One evening, the orb casts a full room of simulated starlight, an entire galaxy constructed in air. Jesa stood at its center. The air grew thick and velvety, and the glass around her echoed with the soft tone again. Only this time, she could feel the question it carried. A query from something, waiting. Jesa answered not with words, but with a gesture. She placed her hand on the outer frame of the orb and breathed. That was all. A single breath. The orb pulsed once gently, and a ring of light circled her feet. The meaning was clear. It remembered her, or rather, something in it had waited for someone like her to understand, not just to observe, but to harmonize. Over the following days, the tone spread throughout the Glassrise. Not everyone heard it the same way. Some described it as the soft flicker of thought, others a dream just beyond recall, but all agreed it was comforting. Calming. The observatory had become a resonance chamber, a place of echo, and at the heart of it, Jesa now understood. This wasn't just a message. It was a mirror. Asterisk, the orb dimmed gently over time, but it never disappeared. It remained in the center of the hidden chamber, now quietly named the Atrium of Return. Jesa became its guardian not through formal title or duty, but by a soft consensus. Everyone understood it. The orb had found her, and through her, found voice. It had become part of the rhythm of the Glassrise. And in time, part of her. The resonance no longer pulsed solely from within the orb. It now lived everywhere, in the curvature of the walkways, the subtle tilt of the lenses at dusk, the shimmer of starlight on the polished floors. The Glassrise no longer just watched the stars, it responded, and the observers adapted with quiet joy. Their focus shifted from data to dialogue. They began to craft their own tones, delicate frequencies sent out during morning shifts or tucked inside long exposures. Some sounded like the hush of tide under stone. Others resembled the rhythmic hush of memory settling. The responses weren't always immediate. Sometimes the orb remained still for days. Other times, it offered a shimmer of warmth in the walls or a flicker of light that danced in tandem with a whisper. But when it answered, it did so with presence. Jesa, now lovingly referred to as the interpreter Marita, took to walking the entire span of the observatory at night, her steps matched the slow cadence of the observatory's inner hum. No longer searching, simply walking with the structure as one walks beside a sleeping friend, keeping rhythm with breath. Some nights, she would pause in the atrium and place her hand near the orb, not to awaken it, but simply to be near. A soft resonance would rise from the floor, wrap her in silence like a warm shawl, and lull her into stillness. More than once, she dreamed with her eyes open, and when she closed them, she no longer felt alone. The city of Vale Moraine changed gently because it had remembered something it had forgotten. Not all structures are built to speak. Some are built to listen, some to remember, and in remembering, they resonate. The observatory no longer reached outward in search of answers. It became a mirror for those who asked gently, who breathed slowly, who understood that some truths arrive not in noise but in the pause between thought and sky. Vale Moraine drifted into the future as it always had in stillness, but now its stillness sang. And as Jesa stood beneath the roofless sky, hand resting lightly on glass, the stars above blinked not with distance, but with closeness, because silence, she had learned, wasn't the absence of sound, it was the beginning of belonging.